The stifling September morning in Alabama in 2008 began with an unusual disturbance on the dirt road of Red Maple Trail. 3 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a modest wooden house on the edge of Conecuh County forest. Neighbors peeked through curtains as tactical-geared officers positioned themselves around the area, moving with the cold precision of a long-prepared plan. Inside, Martha Kellerman, 67 years old, was pouring her morning coffee, a habit she had maintained for over 3 decades since the day her husband James Riley Kellerman vanished without a trace. The urgent knocking sounded at 7:32 a.m. Martha Kellerman, Alabama State Police. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of James Riley Kellerman in 1978. The officers later described how Martha's hand trembled slightly as she set down the cup. But her face remained strangely calm, as if she had been waiting for this moment for 30 long years burdened with secrets. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The summer of 1978 draped a thick, sweltering layer of air over rural Conecuh County, Alabama, heavy with the distinctive scent of red clay soil, where endless pine forests stretched and scattered farms dotted the faded fields. On a plot of land on the outskirts of a thin dirt road like a thread, James Riley Kellerman, 42 years old, lived a cyclical and stable life, tending horses, checking fences, repairing barn roofs when needed, and spending most of his early and late hours around the land he considered an extension of his own body. James was a man of manual labor, large-built, calm, accustomed to waking at dawn to work before the Alabama sun could pour down its scorching heat. That morning was no different from the hundreds before it. He ate hastily, checked the saddle gear again, threw on his old denim jacket, faded at the elbows, and told his wife he was heading into the forest to check the northern fence section, which was often affected after strong winds. A neighboring farmer near the trail said he saw James walking slowly across the open land, leading his familiar horse straight toward the forest edge, his figure gradually shrinking among the tall, straight tree trunks, everything appearing so normal that no one thought it would be the last time they saw him alive. But Alabama weather in summer can change in the blink of an eye. Dark clouds rolled in quickly from the west, the wind shifted to a fierce howl, and rain poured down on the forest like a wall of water swallowing every fresh footprint. When the sky cleared again, it was also the moment James's horse returned to the stable on its own, drenched and restless, while he was completely gone without a trace. The family initially thought James was sheltering from the rain somewhere in the forest, or delayed by having to check broken fence sections. But as the afternoon wore on, darkness gradually fell, and the silence from the deep woods became alarming. Calling neighbors, walking around nearby trails on the farm, shining lights into the bushes, all efforts were futile. No one found any sign that James had ever emerged from the area he entered while it was still light. Night fell completely, and the family was forced to accept that something unusual had happened. And after many hours of fruitless searching on their own, they finally decided to report to the police that James Riley Kellerman was officially missing. When the missing person call was transferred to the Conecuh County Sheriff's Office late that night, the duty officer immediately recorded the information according to procedure, opening a new file under the name James Riley Kellerman, noting the report time and the informant's name. Although adult missing persons reports at that time were not rare in rural areas, the adverse weather factors and dense forest terrain meant the night shift did not take it lightly. In the first interview with the family, investigators verified the most critical facts: James's recent health, medical history, daily habits, the possibility of him traveling far that day, as well as his familiarity with the northern forest area. His wife stated that James was healthy, had never shown signs of wanting to leave the farm, did not use alcohol or prescription drugs that could affect cognition, and was especially familiar with most trails around the farm since he had lived there his whole life. Neighbors described him as cautious, not adventurous, and always having a clear plan whenever he entered the forest. This information led police to quickly rule out the possibility of James leaving voluntarily or accidentally wandering too far. After confirming James's last activity was checking the fence and verifying the neighbor's last sighting matched the wife's account, investigators began sketching the initial search perimeter. Based on the family's description of the trail James usually took, combined with the location of low-lying land where rain easily caused mud, the team determined the core search radius in the forest north of the farm, extending to an abandoned dirt road leading to a shallow stream. Police also asked about areas James avoided, dense forest sections with dangerous terrain or abundant wildlife, to prioritize low areas and avoid dispersing resources. Concurrently, the investigator collected information on when the rain started, its intensity, and the likelihood that the rain had washed away footprints or altered the terrain. This was a crucial factor for the search plan because traces could have been swept away or covered by soft soil. At this point, the missing person file began to take shape with all necessary entries. James's appearance when he left home, clothing, items he carried, expected return time, intended destination, and estimated distance he could travel in the few hours between leaving home and the horse returning. Once all basic information was established, police informed the family that a small-scale search would be conducted the next morning to take advantage of daylight and the still soft ground for better trace detection. A small group was assigned to directly enter the forest following main trails, including an experienced deputy as forest guide and 2 local volunteers familiar with the area's terrain. Another group was responsible for sweeping the land around the farm to verify no signs of return or signals indicating James had changed his route. The rush deployment the next day was prioritized because Alabama weather in the mid-year months is highly unpredictable. If more rain came, any remaining faint traces could disappear completely. Though it was a missing adult case with no clear signs of crime, police still treated it as a potentially dangerous situation due to the deep forest environment, accident risks, and unpredictable weather developments. The night ended with the initial report completed and sent to the county office, along with instructions to prepare personnel, topographic maps, scene marking tools, and communication equipment for the next morning's search. The family was advised not to continue entering the forest at night to avoid disturbing traces and endangering themselves, and was promised updates as soon as the search team deployed. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood that every passing hour reduced the hope of finding James safe. The next morning, as sunlight just pierced through the thick pine canopy, Conecuh County's first search team was already at the trailhead leading into the forest where James Riley Kellerman was last seen. They carried topographic maps, compasses, marking rope and water, dividing into 3 small groups as planned from the night before, 1 group on foot sticking close to the main trail, 1 group on horseback to expand the sweep along hard-to-reach side branches, and a community support group of 2 local farmers familiar with every slope in the forest. Upon entering the first forest section, it was easy to notice the clear change in the ground after the heavy rain, soft soil, water pooled in long streaks, and low spots glistening with thin mud, making trace identification harder than anticipated. However, just a few dozen meters from the forest turn-in point, the walking group discovered a strip of grass bent in one direction, as if something heavy or a person had passed in a hurry. These streaks ran parallel to the main trail, then vanished as the ground became muddier. A deputy knelt to examine, noting the grass breakage consistent with an adult's body weight, but unable to determine timing because moisture had softened the entire grass stems. Moving deeper, they encountered soil churned up, forming messy patches stretching several meters, unlike familiar wildlife tracks in the area, and unclear if trampling or sliding marks. The horseback group followed a larger forest loop, skirting an old trail leading to old-growth pine, as this was the route James occasionally used to check the far fence end. The guide said that in good weather, horse hoof or cowboy boot prints would show clearly on the thin soil layer, but today most were faded or washed down slopes by water. Many ground points still showed small depressions, like boot prints nearly erased by water, so the search team could only record without concluding relevance. The community support group, starting from the West Forest side, swept a higher dirt branch to look for unusual signs of broken vegetation or horizontally plowed soil. They found no clear signs beyond a few splintered pine branches that strong wind could fully cause. One of the two said, if James encountered heavy rain midway, he would likely seek shelter under large canopied ancient pines, so the group began checking large tree bases within a nearly 200-meter radius around the main trail. However, at each checkpoint, the ground was in similar condition: wet, mushy, slippery, and lacking any intact clear signs. Last night's rain seemed to have erased nearly everything that could lead them to where James had stood or passed. By mid-morning, the search team began expanding to the gentle slope leading to the shallow stream bed, where the ground was less mud-covered due to strong water flow. Here, they found a long print like a boot, but distorted, only the outer edge remaining. The investigator noted it in the scene report, but said it couldn't be confirmed as James's since the forest often had hunters or kids playing around this area. Meanwhile, the horseback group headed north, where the trail sloped up then curved down to a small valley. One member spotted unusually sunken soil in a curved arc, indicating something heavy may have impacted during the storm. But at that point, they couldn't distinguish if it was rainwater pooling, a fallen tree, or a sliding mark from someone seeking bad weather shelter. All were marked with colored rope for later teams to reassess. Wind blowing continuously from the forest dropped more leaves and debris, further changing the terrain hourly. The deputies quickly realized the search couldn't rely entirely on remaining natural traces, as every ground indicator was being distorted by weather almost immediately. Near noon, as the sun rose higher and mist cleared, they tried using binoculars from forest clearings to spot metal reflections or easily identifiable items like hats, saddles, leather straps, but visibility was blocked by dense pine. The only valuable trace from the first morning was scattered, unconnected anomalies. Nonetheless, the search team decided to mark all suspicious positions for re-sweeping in later rounds. At the end of the first day's search, the scene log recorded 3 types of traces: bent grass and churned soil in narrow areas, incomplete prints on wet ground, and sunken soil areas in the North Forest branch. However, all were insufficient to determine James's movement direction in the weather that had blurred most natural evidence. The only thing the search team could confirm was that James's disappearance wasn't simply getting lost in normal weather. The previous night's rain had complicated every possibility, making tracing him a major challenge from the very first hours. As the initial efforts yielded no clear direction, the Conecuh County search team decided to expand the scope of operations the next day, focusing on side trails, rarely visited dense forest sections, small stream beds, and low-lying areas that often retained moisture longer after rain. The goal of this phase was to avoid missing areas where James Riley Kellerman might have ventured while seeking shelter from the sudden downpour, or places where he could have accidentally fallen, encountered an accident, or been obstructed by complex terrain. The walking group split into 2 directions. One group followed the looping branch leading down to low-lying land, believed to be where overflowing water might have carried traces, while the others skirted towards small stream beds to look for unusual changes in vegetation or signs of objects caught. In the eastern low-lying area, the lead searchers discovered a small item mixed in wet grass, a torn piece of denim fabric at the edge, sized only to fit a palm. The fabric was water-soaked and mud-caked, its blue color faded, making it hard to determine if it belonged to work clothing or another item. However, since James often wore denim jackets or pants while working, the search team recorded the location and collected the sample as evidence, though they could not yet conclude any direct connection. Not far away, at the base of a large leaning fallen pine, the ground showed a deep mud sink in a curved arc that some members suspected could be a truck tire mark. But upon close inspection, they saw the arc was incomplete, slid and blurred at the edges, possibly due to water flow or soft soil distorting the shape. A deputy measured the width of the sink, finding it close to the width of an old truck tire, but only a small portion of the mark remained clear enough, unable to determine formation time. Additionally, access to this area was quite difficult for regular trucks, so the search team noted it but did not consider it a primary clue. Meanwhile, the group sweeping the stream bed area moved slowly along the water's edge, searching for objects that might have been washed down from upper slopes. They found several horizontally broken branches, some pine needles pushed in a specific direction, and unusually silted soil, but these phenomena could entirely result from post-rain flow. The only notable thing was a large branch broken from top to bottom, as if something heavy had fallen on it, but lacking any remaining object nearby to support the hypothesis. A local volunteer said that after heavy rains, old branches often fell on their own without impact. Thus, this detail was marked, but not prioritized, to ensure no area possibly concealing traces due to thick canopy was missed. The search team shifted to sweeping higher ground where rain caused less erosion. On a relatively flat, wind-sheltered patch, they saw several grass sections bent in the same direction, a few meters long, but not dense enough to form a person's or horse's path. Preliminary analysis suggested strong winds the previous night could create such grooves. At the area's edge, they found a small mud-covered rope piece of unclear origin. This item was collected for storage, but hard to visually determine in which event it was dropped. The search expansion continued northward, where a narrow trail led deep into old-growth forest. Here, signs of human impact became harder to distinguish from natural phenomena because the thick pine needle layer easily concealed any activity below. The search team discovered an unusually flattened soil section, as if something heavy had slid over but without sharp edges. A deputy probed with a stick, noting softer than normal soil, but unable to determine anything beneath due to limited depth. Members marked this point for later sweeping but could not confirm it might be where James was injured or fell. On the way back to the main search axis, they discovered another notable detail, a small trail section blocked by a large horizontal pine branch, but the break showed old signs, not matching last night's rain. Most likely a natural event from some time before. Still, since James might have passed this area, the team noted it on the map to rule out him trying to avoid the branch and slipping. By mid-afternoon, as light softened and the forest grew dim, the search team clearly felt the greatest difficulty lay in distinguishing traces formed on the day James disappeared from mere weather consequences. All new signs, denim piece, truck tire mark, sunken soil, bent grass, altered stream bed, lacked direct correlation to James's disappearance. No clearly identifying items, no signs of carelessly discarded personal belongings, and no point definitively confirming a person was injured or tried moving in this area. Each group returned to the assembly point with long lists of scattered signs, but all only showed a pine forest deformed by rain and wind, not revealing the victim's path or final location. The second day's report thus mainly recorded natural phenomena and some potentially related but unconfirmable signs. Marking all these points served subsequent search days when the team needed to return with a more systematic approach, as everyone understood any small detail, though currently meaningless, could hold value if correctly reconnected in the overall picture. While search teams continued forest sweeps on the third day, another investigation group from the sheriff's office was tasked with gathering additional statements from family and nearby residents to cross-reference the timeline before James Riley Kellerman's disappearance. This was done to determine if he showed any unusual signs beforehand or any reason he changed schedule that morning. The first interviewed was his wife, Martha Kellerman. She said James left home to check the northern fence section, often damaged after strong winds, especially after a small storm that swept through the previous week. According to Martha, James mentioned seeing wildlife signs near the fence and wanted to inspect to prevent livestock escape. She also said her husband felt slightly unwell the previous evening, but still decided to do the usual work because he didn't want farm tasks to pile up. When asked about James's departure time, Martha gave a relatively wide estimated window, saying she only remembered he left early morning before the sun got harsh. At first glance, this statement raised no suspicion, but when investigators cross-referenced with accounts from neighbors living a short distance from the farm, some details began to mismatch. The closest neighbor, Mr. Clyde Harmon, said he saw James pass the small field leading to the forest at a later time than Martha stated. According to his description, sunlight was already high and wind had shifted, signs of late morning rather than early. Mr. Harmon recounted leaving the poultry barn mid-morning and seeing James walking beside the horse, not hurried, as if just starting his work. Another neighbor, Mrs. Lucille Harbin, provided information that the previous evening she saw no activity around the northern fence area, and she didn't recall James ever mentioning serious fence issues. According to her, this work was usually done on weekends, not midweek, like the day James disappeared. When Martha was asked again about this, she explained her husband might have changed the work schedule last minute and didn't tell anyone else but her, but this answer did not reduce the discrepancies between accounts. Investigators noted as a priority that James's departure time, per Martha, did not match neighbor observations, and the fence check purpose was not confirmed by anyone else who recently spoke with the victim. Continuing the probe, police asked Martha about James's health that morning. Martha affirmed he was healthy and alert, but Mr. Harmon commented that James's gait was somewhat slower than usual, as if tired or having difficulty moving on rough terrain. This was not a serious description, but still recorded because differences between family and witnesses are always valuable when building a timeline. When cross-referencing all accounts, the investigation force noticed a chain of small but consistent inconsistencies: departure time, trip purpose, health condition, and even the final direction James entered the forest. Though each inconsistency alone was insufficient to conclude suspicious behavior, their repetition began drawing police attention. However, with no clear crime signs and no physical evidence pointing to anyone besides environmental factors causing James's disappearance, these contradictions were deemed not yet weighty enough to redirect the investigation. The end-of-day report noted Martha's statement was somewhat vague and showed small changes when asked multiple times, but investigators also noted stress and anxiety could affect memory, especially in emergencies. Some neighbor details were also considered subjective, since they did not observe James continuously. Thus, despite imperfect matches, police temporarily viewed these discrepancies as common in rural missing persons cases, where time passes slowly and memories are not always recorded precisely minute by minute. Nonetheless, all data was entered into the file for future cross-reference, because in cases like this, any anomaly could become important when connected to new findings or when context changes. On the next search day, the teams were redeployed to the northern pine forest area where previous scattered traces had been marked, with the goal of more thoroughly sweeping each suspicious plot. During movement along the circled points, they began discovering additional terrain changes not observed on the first day due to thick mud and rainwater still covering. In a low-lying area near a side trail, the ground showed an unusually deep sink, about a few square meters wide, with the mud surface compressed into uneven depressions. A local volunteer assisting commented that soil in this area doesn't easily sink deeply unless subjected to great force or strong impact in a short time. However, the search team could not determine if this depression was created before or after the rain, as the surface structure had been softened by water flow and hard to retain initial boundaries. Extending from this sunken point toward a gentle slope was a horizontal mud streak, as if something had been displaced or slid across. Still, when compared to drag marks from fallen trees or sliding rocks, the possibility of it being a natural storm consequence could not be ruled out. While the forest team performed duties, another group reswept the area near the horse stable, hoping to identify signs James might have encountered an issue before entering the forest. This area had been preliminarily checked on the first day, but due to darkness and heavy mud, many small details were not clearly visible. The second check revealed a notable detail: a length of rope used for tying horses or hanging tools had been abruptly cut short. The remaining end on the hanging hook had unevenly broken fibers, as if impacted by strong force or stretched before snapping. Investigators could not determine if the rope was cut by a sharp object or worn from use, as the entire section was mud-caked and frayed at edges due to wetness. The stable also showed light disturbance, Several tools hung on the wall were misaligned from the family's description, and boot prints on the ground floor appeared more than the number of people confirmed entering the area in the prior 2 days. However, the boot prints were not clear enough to distinguish shoe type or size, and heavy rain had turned them into unrecognizable mud patches. A deputy suggested the cut rope might just be an incident from James's prior work, especially since the family confirmed he used this rope type for fence repairs or temporary tying. But with no way to verify the snapping time, this detail was recorded without direct relevance evaluation. When the search team returned to Forrest's suspicious points, they noticed the drag streak was longer than initially imagined. Based on surface disturbance level, it could be inferred the dragged object had a wide surface and was relatively heavy. But since the soil had softened and changed over hours, collecting accurate information on pull force, direction, or timing was infeasible. A deputy tried probing with a stick to assess soil hardness at different points along the drag, but wet soil variation was insufficient for clear contrast. Additionally, water flows from upper slopes had crossed most of this streak, mixing the surface between drag marks and water scour. Those characteristics made every inference fragile. On the higher slope, the search team discovered several small depressions like blurred footsteps. Some marks were men's shoe size equivalent, but beside them were other depressions, possibly from sinking rocks or animals. No mark was clear enough for comparison or conclusion. The team also swept surrounding bushes and found several small broken branches, but break direction was not distinctive enough to differentiate top-down force or strong wind. The lack of modern forensic technology at that time, no detailed footprint analysis capability, no 3D scene reconstruction means, no specialized surface soil scanning, left the investigation team relying only on direct observation, which weather was severely obstructing. They also could not collect soil samples for interlayer analysis, as preserving and comparing 1978 soil samples was nearly impossible with available technology. Details like the cut rope, soil collapse, drag streak, or blurred footprints quickly shifted from notable suspicious to recorded insufficient information. At search end, the third day's scene report was much thicker, but mostly listed signs of undetermined origin or appearance time. Though these discoveries made the search team feel something unusual around where James was last seen, they could prove nothing, let alone link them to any specific situation involving the victim. In that context, every detail could become a clue, but simultaneously could be completely meaningless before harsh natural conditions that concealed or distorted every trace in just hours. Parallel to continuing forest searches, the investigation force conducted a more thorough sweep of James Riley Kellerman's living area to determine if anything on the farm could relate to his disappearance. Examining the home's surroundings is usually necessary to rule out the victim encountering an accident within daily activity range or discovering signs he prepared to leave unannounced. The first recheck point was the horse stable, where prior search teams had noted some anomalies, like the cut rope and disturbed boot prints. This time, the investigation team examined every nook with a more systematic approach. They recorded that several fixed-position work tools on walls or racks, like hammers, nails, pliers, small hoes, were no longer in usual spots. The family explained James sometimes hastily grabbed items for fence repairs or stable care without replacing them, but when specifically asked when these were last used, no one remembered clearly. Investigators deemed tool misalignment not yet abnormal without evidence they were used immediately before James's disappearance. However, when inventorying all tools in the storage shed beside the stable, the investigation group discovered missing several small-sized items like wire, nails, and especially a medium-sized metal toolbox James used frequently. The family said this box was sometimes taken by James on the truck if planning repairs on far farm parts, but its absence from the stable could not prove he took it the missing morning. Investigators noted this as a detail for re-examination after more forest data. Additionally, when checking the ground inside and around the stable, the investigation group noticed soil with varying compression levels, inconsistent with the number of people and animals family confirmed recently entering. But due to wet weather making all prints hard to distinguish, they could not determine if these compressions formed before or after James's disappearance. Moving to the tool shed behind the house, the investigation team discovered more moved items. Some heavy objects like livestock feed bags and small hay bales had been pulled off daily positions, but the family explained this could occur from James needing passage when gathering tools or arranging the stable the previous week. However, lighter items like rope, leather gloves, and several oil cans were more scattered than usual, as if someone hastily searched or selected items then left without returning to place. Investigators recorded this scattering as only mildly suspicious, as many farm sheds do not maintain absolute neatness, especially when the owner habitually does everything himself. The sweep continued to the vehicle parking area in front of the farm, where logically James's truck should be parked if he entered the forest by horse. However, the investigation team found no truck anywhere within the property. The truck was considered James's key vehicle for major tasks, so its absence prompted police questions. When asked about this vehicle, Martha Kellerman gave not entirely consistent answers. Initially, she said James left it on the southern farm plot but could not specify location. Later, she said he might have used it to haul materials to the main road a few days prior and possibly not returned it. Investigators noted the explanation change about the truck could stem from unclear memory or excessive worry, but inability to locate the truck made the picture of James's activities right before disappearance even vaguer. However, with no valid reason yet to believe the truck directly related to the disappearance, police only recorded this detail as a factor for broader recheck. Besides, they checked the area behind the main house, where the family often left old farm tools or unused items. Here, there were no clear signs proving unusual disturbance. Grass was trampled, but possibly from prior search teams passing. The storage porch had some water flow marks and small items fallen from shelves, but this was attributed to the recent rain rather than human impact. From these results, that day's investigation team report affirmed that though many points showed item movement in the stable and shed, especially the metal toolbox and truck absence, none carried conclusive weight to affirm crime signs. Every suspicious point could result from work habits, casual item placement by the farm owner, or natural weather developments. Martha's inconsistent truck location explanation was evaluated as noteworthy but insufficient to change investigation direction. The investigation team concluded James's farm contained many details worth noting, but no direct link to his disappearance. These notes would be kept in the file to serve cross-referencing with subsequent discoveries if the search continued yielding no clear results. While the search teams continued to comb through the forest and farm areas, the investigator in charge of the missing person case determined that Martha Kellerman's statement needed further clarification, especially after numerous details regarding James's daily activities and the movement of items in the horse barn proved inconsistent with what the family and neighbors had reported. The second interview with Martha was conducted amid initial reports that had noted multiple ambiguities, and the police needed more precise information to adjust the search scope. Right from the start of the interview, the contradictions began to emerge more clearly. This time, when asked again about the time James left the house, Martha provided a more specific figure than her initial vague response, stating that he left very early, when the sun was just peeking out. But this contradicted both her previous statement, when she said the sun wasn't harsh yet, and the account of neighbor Clyde Harmon, who was certain he saw James leave the farm later in the morning, when the sun was strong enough to cast long shadows across the fields. When the investigator asked Martha to specify exactly what clothing James was wearing that day, she described him wearing a light-colored cotton jacket, work pants, and leather boots. But what Lucille Harbin said was different. She clearly remembered him wearing a dark denim jacket and his characteristic wide-brimmed hat. This difference could not be dismissed as a minor memory lapse when the descriptions were so starkly opposite. In particular, previous search teams had found a torn piece of denim on a low forest branch, further highlighting the mismatch between Martha's description and what had appeared in the search area. When asked about the purpose of James's trip, Martha continued to offer a new version. While in the first interview, She affirmed he went to check the northern fence. This time she said James had mentioned wanting to recheck a trail near the stream because he had heard strange noises from that direction in recent days. This immediately drew the investigation team's attention, as no witness had mentioned James intending to go to the stream area. Moreover, the family had not mentioned any irregularities around that location. When asked why she was only mentioning this detail now, Martha replied that she didn't remember clearly in the previous conversation because she was too panicked. Although stress could affect memory, changing the entire purpose of the trip led the police to question the reliability of her statement. The contradictions continued to mount when the police asked Martha about James's health in the recent days. Initially, she said he was completely healthy, with no signs of fatigue, but this time she stated that he complained of back pain the evening before the disappearance and might have been moving slower than usual because of it. However, witness Harmon described James as appearing slower than usual without mentioning any signs of pain or discomfort, which led the investigator to realize that the details from Martha were continually shifting in a way that filled in points previously raised by neighbors or family. When asked about James's clothing again, she continued to change a small detail, saying that he might have worn the old hat in the shed instead of the familiar wide-brimmed one. This change came after the investigator mentioned Harmon's statement, heightening suspicions that Martha was adjusting her account to fit what she thought the police expected. Not only contradictions about the timing and clothing, but Martha's statement about James's truck also became more confusing. In the first interview, she said she didn't know where the truck was and assumed James might have left it on the southern plot. This time, she said he might have driven it out for a test run after a recent minor repair, even though she hadn't mentioned any need for repairs before. When asked why she hadn't mentioned this from the start, Martha replied that she wasn't sure if she should mention it because she didn't want to cause misunderstanding. This cautious attitude led the police to question whether she was withholding some important information. People who knew James also added details that increased the inconsistencies. One of his friends stated that James did not have a habit of checking fences midweek, and he never did such work after a heavy night of rain because the slippery ground would make traveling by horse dangerous. Martha described fence checking as an almost daily routine, contrary to accounts from those who had worked with him. A distant relative, living a few miles away, also confirmed that James had not recently mentioned any repairs needed around the farm. All these small but repeated details led the investigator to form a picture that Martha was providing an unstable account, changing with each session, and even tending to adjust based on what she thought the police already knew. Nevertheless, the police remained very cautious in assessing the legal value of these contradictions. In the context of no body, no direct physical evidence, and no witnesses seeing James in an accident or encountering strangers, viewing Martha as a suspect was inappropriate. However, the repeated inconsistencies forced the investigation team to mark her as a person of interest, meaning someone whose statements or behavior needed closer scrutiny in the search process, though not yet sufficient to classify as a formal suspect. The end-of-day report noted that the victim's wife's statements contained many changes that were difficult to explain by panic or ordinary memory lapses. Information from neighbors and friends reinforced clear contradictions, and the current situation required the police to continue collecting data from both the forest and farm areas to assess whether these anomalies could relate to James's disappearance or were merely memory fractures in a stressful situation. In any case, the new details were carefully recorded because they could become key factors if the investigation took an unexpected direction. As the contradictions in Martha's statements began to accumulate, but were still insufficient to form a clear investigative direction, the police force was compelled to expand the scope of consideration to secondary possibilities, which are common in missing persons cases in vast rural areas with complex terrain like Conecuh County. One of the first hypotheses considered was the possibility that James had an accident in the forest. He was familiar with the terrain, but that did not rule out the chance of slipping on a slope, being hit by a falling branch, or getting trapped in a hard-to-reach place. The search teams had checked many dangerous terrain locations, such as sinkhole areas, stream gullies, and narrow trails prone to slipping, but found no signs of anyone or anything falling or being injured. The ground was too soft and disturbed after the rain, severely limiting any ability to reconstruct traces. The second hypothesis was the possibility that James got lost deep in the forest. Though it seemed unlikely given his years of experience in the area, investigators still considered the chance he became disoriented during heavy rain or while seeking shelter. However, the search teams had covered most of the forest area accessible within a day, especially logical exit routes, but found no signs of prolonged presence, no campfire ashes, tree cuts, clear footprints, or eating signs. These hypotheses gradually weakened because if James was still in the forest, whether injured or disoriented, the search teams should have found some specific trace. The third hypothesis arose when a few witnesses unexpectedly provided information about strangers appearing around the time James disappeared. One person living near the main road out of town said he saw an old dark-colored truck heading toward the forest that morning, but he couldn't remember the exact time or license plate. Another said that a few days earlier, a strange man was walking near the local grocery store with a sneaky demeanor, but she couldn't describe details beyond him not looking like a local. There was even someone who said about a week before James vanished, they saw a sedan stop near the turnoff to the Kellerman farm, as if observing the area. However, all these accounts were fragmented, lacking specific identifying features, and most importantly, there was no evidence proving the presence of these people or vehicles was related to James's disappearance. Because in rural areas like Conecuh County, the appearance of strange vehicles or people was not uncommon, it could just be hunters from elsewhere, passers-by, or people taking shortcuts on dirt roads. When investigators tried to connect these accounts to the time James left the farm, they found very few overlaps. Some witnesses couldn't recall the exact day or time of seeing strangers, others recounted events from days before or after the critical time. Additionally, the lack of any physical signs in the forest, proving outsider presence, reinforced the view that these were likely random, unrelated occurrences. Another investigative branch considered the possibility that James encountered a conflict with someone in the forest, such as poachers, illegal loggers, or people using trails as shortcuts. However, when police worked with neighboring landowners and regular hunters in the area, no one reported unusual activity or strangers around that time. The landowners also confirmed the forest in this area was quite peaceful, with few disputes or serious conflicts. Furthermore, James had no known enemies, no debts, no grudges with anyone, and according to acquaintances, he was well liked in the community. This made the stranger intervention hypothesis even more tenuous. Another investigative direction related to the possibility of his disappearance due to a sudden medical emergency. However, James was in good health, with no history of serious illness and no unusual symptoms in the preceding days. If he had a health issue while in the forest, the search teams should have found signs of him collapsing or personal items dropped, which they had not. After reviewing all information outside the family, the compiled report showed these secondary investigative directions all lacked strong enough basis to expand. No physical evidence, no clear traces, and no consistent statements provided a specific path. Investigators concluded that relying on these hypotheses would consume resources without guaranteed progress. However, all were retained in the file, with notes that if new evidence emerged, these hypotheses could be revisited. In that context, the investigation began reaching the limits of inferences based on natural observations, and the search team understood that without a major discovery in the coming days, James Riley Kellerman's disappearance would become increasingly difficult to resolve. After more than a week of continuous searching with a mixed team of county police, local volunteers, and horseback groups familiar with the terrain, the compiled field report showed no specific signs proving James Riley Kellerman had encountered criminal activity or conflict with strangers. From streamed gullies, steep slopes, old trails, to low-lying areas prone to subsidence, every potential accident site was marked, traversed multiple times, and cross-referenced with witness statements, but no personal items, torn clothing, blood stains, or typical signs of strong impact appeared. The denim piece, tire tracks, and previously disturbed soil areas were examined thoroughly, but their random dispersion, the impact of the heavy rain, and the lack of connecting points rendered them without directional value. Hypotheses involving strangers, strange vehicles, or rare forest conflicts all lacked sufficient evidence to sustain. In that context, the police were forced to apply the professional classification used in many rural missing persons cases at that time, missing with undetermined cause. This was not a final conclusion, but the only way to officially file the case when there was no physical evidence, no body, and no legal basis to continue investigating in a criminal direction. The summary minutes showed local police had used all available resources, both manpower and tools, to search for James, but the lack of modern forensic technology, detailed mapping capabilities, and specialized equipment in 1978 meant trace pursuit could only rely on natural observation and human experience. Moreover, after nearly 10 days, traces in the forest had been distorted by weather and animals to the point of incomparability. Though not completely ruling out criminal possibility, police concluded there was no valid evidence indicating anyone else was involved in James's disappearance. The report was sent back to the family, emphasizing they would continue receiving new information if witnesses emerged or related objects were found. However, this was unlikely to provide realistic hope. Refusing to let the matter remain unresolved, the family decided to continue searching in their own way. They, along with relatives, friends, and neighbors, organized small groups to venture deep into the forest, check streams, dig in soft soil areas, even send notices to nearby farms and gas stations in hopes someone had seen James on the day he disappeared. But they only repeated what the police had done, following trails leading nowhere, standing before areas so dense light barely penetrated, and trying to find a clear sign in a space too vast for humans to cover. Summer passed. Heavy rains fell again, erasing what little remained on the ground. Each search day was like the one before, no discoveries, no new clues, no tips from the public. After a while, the spontaneous search groups began to thin out, partly from exhaustion, partly because no one knew what to look for anymore. The family still clung to a slim hope that James might be injured and trapped somewhere, but this became harder to justify as time passed without any survival signs. Nevertheless, they did not declare a stop to searching, but shifted to maintaining sporadic activities, checking trails after storms, asking hunters, re-examining farm corners. But all pointed to one thing: the reality had slipped beyond their grasp. By month's end, the Kellerman farm sank into unusual silence, and an unprecedented unease enveloped the entire area. James Riley Kellerman's disappearance entered a phase of quiescence. No progress, no conclusion, and no clear sign revealing what had happened on that summer morning. By 1980, nearly 2 years after James Riley Kellerman disappeared, his case file had seen almost no significant progress. Repeated reviews of field reports all led to the same conclusion: no body, no traces, no reliable witnesses, and no legal basis to expand the investigation in any direction. The collected evidence, a torn piece of denim, unidentified tire tracks, disturbed soil areas, and some notes about cut rope, remained in standard brown paper bags of the era, but none provided clear analytical value. Forensic technology in late 1970s Alabama was extremely limited. There was no DNA testing, no ability to analyze fibers or microscopic traces, and matching shoe or tire prints could not be done with the detail possible decades later. The Conecuh County Sheriff's Office faced overload from missing persons cases, accidents, and land disputes, leaving them unable to continue dedicating major resources to a case stretched over years without a single concrete lid. Finally, in the fall of 1980, James's file was officially moved to cold case status, a category for unsolved cases awaiting new discoveries or future technological advances. This decision did not mean abandonment, but it meant the case was no longer actively investigated and would only be revisited with new information. All related documents, witness interview transcripts, Martha's statement records, forest search maps, terrain descriptions, scene photos, and the evidence list were classified, stamped, and placed in county storage. This was done by the book, but for those who had searched for James, it left a sense of incompleteness and heaviness. Among them, Deputy Samuel Clark was the most haunted by the case. Young at the time, only a few years into the job, Clark had spent the most time in the forest searching for James. He recorded every observation in a personal brown leather notebook, not part of the official file. In it, Clark kept things he felt were inadequately explained, why Martha repeatedly changed her account of when James left the house, the unclear disappearance of James's truck, and why cut rope appeared in the horse barn when the family said no one had used it near the time of the disappearance. He also noted that the denim piece was found quite far from where witnesses last saw James, a detail he felt did not fit James's movement habits. However, these notes were insufficient to expand the investigation or request additional search warrants. They existed only as Clark's private thoughts, unable to be turned into action. When the file was moved to cold case status, all of Clark's prior efforts were effectively frozen with it. He disagreed but could not oppose the administrative decision. In the investigative system of the time, gut suspicion was not grounds to keep a case active. Still, Clark felt this disappearance was more unusual than the lost in the woods or random accident cases he had handled. He wrote in his notebook at the end of 1980, "No body, no traces, no explanation. But this doesn't feel like a lost case. Something is unseen." That was a note he never put in an official report. As the file was placed in a heavy metal cabinet in county storage, James Riley Kellerman's case slowly sank into silence. The family had reduced spontaneous searches due to exhaustion, and the local community gradually came to see the disappearance as a sad mystery of the land. Everything quieted down, and no one knew if the case would ever be reopened. But Deputy Clark did not forget. His personal notebook stayed on his desk, a reminder that sometimes the truth takes years to surface from the dark. For nearly 3 decades, from 1980 to 2008, James Riley Kellerman's missing person file lay dormant in Conecuh County storage, gathering dust like hundreds of other unsolved cases. However, silence did not mean no information emerged. Over the years, the local community sporadically produced small leads, sometimes fleeting accounts, sometimes delayed observations recalled when James's name was mentioned. But all were too weak, too fragmented, or too late to form the basis for an official investigation. Occasionally, the sheriff's office received reports from hunters deep in the forest, claiming they saw an abandoned old truck or signs of a vehicle partially buried in mud. Each time, local police logged it in the incident book, but upon checking the scene, the truck had often been moved, or it was unrelated scrap, or the story had been exaggerated through layers of retelling. In the mid-1980s, a man in the southern part of the county said he once saw a large metal object buried in a remote area, resembling the lid of a tool chest or truck bed. But when a police team was sent, the area had been altered by heavy rain, causing landslides, making it impossible to locate the spot he indicated. Years later, a local forester told friends he had seen a strange patch of earth that looked recently filled near a drainage ditch in the forest, but the time of discovery was far removed from James's disappearance. Moreover, he no longer remembered the exact location because the forest there had changed significantly when it was logged again late in the decade. Stories like these appeared sporadically, circulating in the community as small puzzle pieces, but no one had concrete evidence, no one retained objects, no one had clear coordinates, and no one provided information at the moment of suspicion for police to respond quickly. In the 1990s, as Alabama underwent economic and demographic shifts, many left rural areas for city jobs. Some new families moving to the forest area around the Kellerman farm heard old stories about the mysterious 1978 disappearance. From there, rumors began to grow in the way small communities do, Some said someone saw truck headlights in the forest on a rainy night. Others said James had a conflict with another landowner. Still others said someone in the family was keeping a secret. However, when police occasionally heard these rumors, they recognized the same issue. No evidence, no specific names, no exact times. All were oral stories altered over many years. No basis was strong enough to convince the system to reopen a long-frozen file. During that period, the budget for cold cases in Conecuh County was virtually non-existent. The county police had to prioritize new cases, traffic accidents, land disturbances, civil disputes, and property crimes, rising with each economic phase. There was no cold case unit, no investigator assigned full-time to review old files. Any new information related to James, if any, would only be noted on a short report and clipped into the old file, with no analysis, no new investigative direction, no in-depth evaluation. By the late 1990s, the number of such sporadic reports increased slightly, mostly from forest goers or logging workers. One logging crew said they found an unusually hard patch of soil under leaf litter, but when police checked, it was just a rotted tree stump. Another hunter said he saw a piece of metal painted light blue, similar to James's truck color, but when he returned, it was gone. All such information was too late, too scant, and too vague. In the early 2000s, as forensic technology began advancing in major cities, rural counties like Conecuh still lacked access to new techniques like DNA analysis or microscopic trace reconstruction. Even when someone suggested reanalyzing the torn denim or cut rope might yield new information, the county had no funding to send samples to a state lab unless there was a clear suspect or significant evidence. All speculation about reopening James's file remained at the idea stage. The Kellerman family, during this time, also grew weary of hope, followed by disappointment. They no longer organized searches as before, but kept newspaper clippings, maps, and community notes in a wooden box at home. Occasionally, when a rumor or new account surfaced, they would review it, but rarely found anything truly credible. They still mentioned James at family gatherings, but the story gradually became an old sorrow rather than a case likely to be resolved. Deputy Samuel Clark, the one who had recorded his suspicions in the leather notebook, still occasionally reviewed his old notes. As his career progressed, Clark moved through various positions in the department, but never forgot the 1978 disappearance. Whenever a fragmented report came in about a truck, buried metal object, or strange forest signs, he quietly noted it, knowing the system would not see these as strong enough signals for action. He understood that the longer time passed, the lower the chance of resolution, but his intuition still could not dismiss the feeling that James's disappearance was not simply an accident or getting lost. Nevertheless, all those notes remained in his personal notebook, having no impact on the official file's operation. In summary, for nearly 30 years, James Riley Kellerman's disappearance survived only through small, scattered leads, unverifiable rumors, and a few hazy memories of those who had passed through that forest. No single factor was weighty enough to reopen the investigation. No piece of information could pull the file from storage. For that long stretch, the case stood still, as if held between two worlds, no ending, but also no new beginning, just a void lasting nearly 3 decades. In September 2008, as southern Alabama endured a prolonged stretch of sun that cracked the earth and piled pine needles into thick layers, a crew of forestry workers hired to clear a section of forest in northwest Conecuh County stumbled upon a strange object buried at an angle beneath hard soil, nearly fully sunken into the ground. The area was just over 300 meters from a trail used in the 1978 search, but for 3 decades, no one had ventured deep there due to dense tree growth, fallen pine trunks blocking paths, and seasonal soil erosion. One worker, while using a shovel to lift a rotted stump, spotted a square metal corner emerging. The metal surface was rusted but intact, mottled brown-black as if soaked in soil for years. Thinking it might be an old forester's tool chest or equipment, the crew began digging around it, trying to pull it up to avoid obstructing tree clearing. But the deeper they dug, The heavier the object proved to be, shaped like a large tool chest or mechanical equipment container, with gently rounded edges typical of metal boxes used on old farms. When they forcefully pried the lid to check inside, a sharp, pungent odor surged out, causing the group to stagger back. They stopped, realizing that trying to open it further might involve something far from an ordinary abandoned item. One worker, a former soldier, immediately recognized the smell, similar to the decay of bone and tissue he had encountered in training. No one dared open the box further. They marked the spot with red ribbon and called the Conecuh County Sheriff's Office. When the police team arrived, they quickly identified the object as a large metal tool chest, sized like an old pickup truck bed box. The surface showed signs of intentional burial, surrounding soil was compacted, tree roots wrapped around some edges, and the lid had faint traces of light blue paint, similar to colors popular on 1970s trucks and farm equipment. To safely open the lid, police used a metal pry bar and high-powered flashlight. Just lifting the edge released a decay odor so strong that 2 officers turned away. Inside, mixed with layers of rotted fabric and soft decomposed material, were bone fragments sized and structured like those of an adult human. A leg bone segment and rib section were relatively intact, crossed over each other, while the rest was heavily decomposed, some mixed into the powdery soil below. Police immediately sealed off the area, ordered the workers back, and notified the Alabama State Forensic Team. In the initial on-scene report, they noted a key detail: the box was an old-style metal tool chest, rectangular with 2 side handles, typically mounted behind a pickup bed to hold chains, mechanical tools, or small materials. This immediately raised a coincidence. In the 1978 file, one of the missing items never found was a similar tool chest regularly used by James Riley Kellerman. When the forensic team fully opened the lid, they discovered additional items inside: rotted denim fabric pieces, an old rope segment, a small metal piece, possibly a hinge, fallen from the box, or another item. Some fabric scraps retained a light blue hue, consistent with work clothing worn by rural men of that era. Due to severe decomposition, gender or identity could not be immediately determined. However, bone size and structure matched an average-built man, closely resembling James's physique from old medical records. Notably, the box was buried not far from areas the 1978 search teams had scanned. That team never found the object because the terrain had changed dramatically over 30 years: landslides, new tree growth covering it, and accumulated leaf litter, creating an entirely new surface. At the time, no one imagined a large tool chest being used in such an unusual way. News of the discovery spread quickly within the sheriff's office. When James's old file was pulled from storage and placed beside the 2008 scene report, the coincidence of the missing tool chest type, discovery location, faint paint color, and accompanying items made the investigation team nearly certain they had found the victim's remains after more than 30 years. They immediately sealed the box and transported everything to the state forensic lab for deeper analysis. In the report sent to superiors, the lead investigator that shift stated, "High likelihood the found object is directly related to the 1978 disappearance. Recommend reopening the file and re-examining all old evidence." The shift to re-investigation status occurred almost immediately. The forensic team conducted initial examinations of the bones and items in the box, carefully collecting soil samples and remaining fabric fibers. Additionally, details on the box, such as a broken hinge, dents on the lower edge, and scratch marks, were considered potentially valuable for analysis, as they might reflect how the object was moved, dragged, or buried. From the moment the box was unearthed, the investigation team's mindset changed completely. A disappearance thought unsolvable suddenly had the clearest sign in 30 years. An internal report noted that the discovery broke the decades-long freeze and enabled full case re-examination. Though no official forensic conclusion was made at the scene, finding human remains in a tool chest, once owned by the victim, was enough to compel authorities to reassess the entire file. Previously fragmented old evidence could now take on new meaning alongside the new find. The denim pieces, cut rope segment, and Deputy Clark's personal notebook suspicions now had a chance to connect into a larger picture. The 2008 discovery was not just a milestone marking a shift in the case's progress, but the starting point for a new investigative phase, a final chance to answer the question that had haunted Conecuh County for over 3 decades: what really happened to James Riley Kellerman on that summer morning? When the metal box containing the body parts and related objects was transferred to the Alabama State Forensic Lab in Montgomery, the analysis process began right in the first week of October 2008. This was the first time since 1978 that the case had evidence strong enough to apply modern forensic technologies that Conecuh County back then had absolutely no access to. The forensic team conducted multi-layered analysis, including DNA identification, bone examination, material comparison, fabric matching, soil analysis, and mechanical evaluation of the metal box. The first procedure was to determine the identity of the remains. Although decomposition over more than 30 years had eliminated most soft tissue, some long bones, particularly the femur and humerus, still retained enough structure to extract nuclear or mitochondrial DNA. The technique for extracting DNA from old bones was applied according to FBI standards, including demineralization with EDTA, sample grinding, and amplification of target STR regions. The initial result obtained was a fairly clear mitochondrial DNA profile, since this type of DNA persists longer in prolonged decomposition environments. The forensic lab then compared this profile with DNA samples from maternal relatives of James Riley Kellerman, specifically a sample from his sister, who was still alive and contacted by investigators immediately after the preliminary results. The matching showed near absolute sequence coincidence in the mitochondria, meaning the remains in the box were very likely those of James. To reinforce the results, the forensic lab continued attempting to extract nuclear DNA from a relatively intact rib section. Despite high decomposition, they obtained some STR segments sufficient for comparison with old hair samples taken from a brush kept by the Kellerman family after James disappeared. The results matched with a reliability exceeding 1 in 100 billion, officially confirming the victim's identity. The body in the box was James Riley Kellerman. After the identity was established, the forensic team moved to the phase of analyzing the evidence inside the box. The rotted denim fragment was considered key evidence because the original 1978 file had recorded a torn denim piece found in the woods, but lacked tools to determine if it related to the victim's clothing. This time, the forensic lab compared the old fabric sample with the rotted denim in the box using 3 methods: fiber histology analysis, dye analysis, and optical absorption spectroscopy. The results showed the 2 samples had similar cotton fiber structure, twist level, fiber density, and indigo dye type consistent with fabric produced in the late 1970s. Notably, a dye sample from the newly found fabric showed fading signs, matching the fading characteristics described in the old report about the denim pants James often wore at work. The forensic lab could not absolutely confirm it was the same pair of pants, but concluded that the 2 fabric samples most likely originated from the same usage source or the same set of clothing. This result began narrowing the investigation direction toward the hypothesis that James had been confined or placed in the toolbox right after disappearing, rather than wandering lost in the woods, as previously speculated. The rope found in the box was also thoroughly analyzed. The original 1978 report had noted rope in the horse barn cut unusually, but lacked fiber analysis to conclude anything. Now, the forensic team used a scanning electron microscope to compare fibers from the newly discovered rope segment with fibers from the 1978 archive sample. The results showed near absolute similarity in fiber size, color, braiding style, and wear. A particular coincidence was that both rope samples had cuts in the form of a sharp blade, not natural wear or tension breakage. The fiber curvature around the cuts in both samples was also similar, indicating they may have been cut with the same type of tool, most likely a farm work knife. Although the exact cutting tool could not be identified since James's knife was missing, this conclusion reinforced that the rope segment in the box was directly related to the evidence found in the horse barn in 1978, completely eliminating the accident hypothesis. Parallel to the evidence analysis, a specialized team analyzed soil from inside and around the box. They used mineralogical comparison, pollen analysis, and sediment analysis to determine if the box had been buried right at the discovery site or moved from elsewhere. The results showed that soil outside the box contained high levels of silicic sand, characteristic of the surface forest layer in Conecuh, while the soil layer inside adhering to the box bottom had more clay, containing pollen from plant species not commonly found in the area where the box was discovered in 2008. This suggested the box may have been placed or dragged through another area of the woods before the perpetrator buried it in the final location. However, vegetation changes and erosion over 3 decades made determining the box's initial location only speculative, not sufficient for precise coordinates. Additionally, the box bottom had long dents, assessed as from being dragged over hard ground or hitting rocks, not from soil compression during burial. This reinforced the assessment that the box had been moved before burial. To complete the forensic dataset, the mechanical analysis group evaluated the hinge and structural damage. They found the hinge deformed outward from inside, proving the lid had endured pressure from an object inside, most likely the unevenly placed body. Some scratches along the box edges indicated the perpetrator may have used a heavy object to push or rotate the box when burying it. These analyses did not provide perpetrator identification value, but helped reconstruct the burial method, thereby supporting evaluation of the perpetrator's preparation level and knowledge. All forensic results were compiled in a report over 150 pages long, sent to the Sheriff's Office and the State Cold Case Unit. For the first time since 1978, the case had strong, consistent physical evidence traceable to origins. The victim's identity was confirmed by DNA. Evidence in the box matched 1978 evidence, and soil analysis suggested the box had been moved, indicating human intervention from the start. These results created a solid foundation to reopen the investigation with a completely different approach. This was no longer a simple missing person case, but a sophisticatedly concealed murder, hidden for 30 years in the silence of an Alabama forest. The forensic report was expanded to the bone dissection phase to determine the mechanism of death, because although the victim's identity and connection to 1978 evidence had been established, the cause of death remained the key factor for investigators to conclude this was an intentional homicide. Forensic experts began by examining the hyoid bone, a small horseshoe-shaped structure in the neck, often damaged in strangulation cases by ligature or hands. Although soft tissue had completely disappeared after more than 30 years of decomposition, the hyoid bone was relatively well preserved thanks to dry soil and the anaerobic environment inside the metal box. When observed under a microscope, the forensic team noted that most of the outer surface of the bone showed a fractured detachment on one side, an incomplete break, but with mechanical characteristics of strong compression from the front or sides. This fracture type did not fit random accidents, such as falls or impacts with hard objects, because those forces typically create longitudinal cracks, quite different from the characteristic strangulation injury pattern. Additionally, the greater horn of the hyoid bone also showed slight inward bending, a phenomenon occurring when a ligature or strangling object presses tightly against the neck area, causing prolonged compression. Combining both factors, forensic experts concluded that the hyoid bone injury was highly consistent with the strangulation mechanism. Additional injuries were also recorded. On the right third and fourth ribs, there were small compression cracks, indicating the victim's torso had endured pressing force or impact while still in the process of dying or right after death. Some wear marks on the shoulder and arm bones showed signs of being dragged while soft tissue had not fully decomposed. This was important evidence that the body had been intentionally moved before being placed in the box. Experts also noted the lower jawbone, where there was a small but clear diagonal crack, a type of injury appearing when strong external force impacts the face, possibly while the victim resisted or was restrained. These scattered injuries, when pieced together, formed an overall picture that James's death did not occur instantly, but resulted from a short sequence of prolonged violent actions, culminating in strangulation. Regarding time of death, although it could not be pinpointed to hours or days, the forensic lab evaluated bone decomposition signs and mineralized tissue damage levels to estimate the victim died in a period very soon after disappearing in 1978. Based on the characteristic mineralization of long-buried bones and soil infiltration into bone microgrooves, experts concluded the body had been placed in the box and buried within a maximum of 1 to 3 days after James vanished. This ruled out the possibility he survived in the woods and died from an accident later. Another important point was abrasion traces on the undersides of the tibia and fibula, indicating the victim's legs had impacted hard objects while being dragged, consistent with longitudinal scratches on the metal box bottom. The forensic team assessed that the box containing the body may have been dragged a distance before burial. From this, they inferred the perpetrator likely had means or considerable strength to move such a heavy object through dense forest terrain. Some soil samples adhering to the bones were analyzed to assess environmental conditions when the body was placed in the box. This soil contained strongly decomposed organic components, suggesting the body was placed in the box while soft tissue was still intact, after which the lid was sealed, causing decomposition to proceed slowly and anaerobically. This further reinforced the conclusion that James died right before the box was sealed, not placed inside while dying or buried alive. Experts also analyzed traces on the neck bones to learn more about the strangulation tool. Based on compression patterns and fracture directions, they concluded the strangulation force was not broad like hand impact, but narrow and evenly applied, consistent with the type of rope in the box. The compression level also indicated the perpetrator applied strong and continuous force, not random action or during victim assistance. The forensic team concluded the most likely cause of death was mechanical asphyxia due to ligature strangulation, with additional injuries from blunt force and dragging. In the official report, they wrote, "Hyoid bone injury signs combined with rib and jawbone injuries indicate clear external force impact. Inconsistent with any accident scenario, the death mechanism is a combination of strangulation and torso compression occurring before the body was placed in the metal box." The final part of the report also emphasized no signs indicated James died from self-inflicted injury or natural causes. No animal damage, no high-fall fracture signs, and no characteristics of live burial asphyxia. All data pointed to an active and intentional death mechanism. This forensic report became the most important foundation for investigators to shift the case from missing person to homicide. After 30 years buried under Alabama forest soil layers, James Riley Kellerman's body finally provided answers about what happened to him on the day he disappeared in 1978. And that answer paved the way for a completely new investigation, the first with solid footing to pursue those responsible for his death. Based on the entire 2008 forensic results and the statements recorded from 1978, the investigation team restarted the file and reached the most important step, reconstructing the disappearance timeline of James Riley Kellerman with far greater accuracy than what could be done 3 decades earlier. This reconstruction not only aimed to re-establish the sequence of events, but also to completely eliminate the hypotheses, once considered plausible in the initial investigation phase, that were now incompatible with the new picture. The 2008 forensic data showed James died within 1 to 3 days after leaving home, the body strangled with rope, subjected to impact, and dragging before being placed in the metal box and buried. This immediately refuted accident hypotheses in the woods, falling off a cliff, drowning in a stream, encountering wild animals, or being lost for many days. It also nearly eliminated the stranger appearing in the woods hypothesis because the box burial traces, drag marks, preparation level, and items used were all directly related to the farm and James's daily habits rather than the behavior of a random attacker. The timeline reconstruction began with the most certain event. James left the farm on a summer morning in 1978, last seen by neighbor Clyde Harmon, leading a horse toward the forest edge. Based on the box discovery location and the 2008 rotted denim fragments, investigators confirmed James's initial movement direction matched witness descriptions. However, soil forensics and drag marks on the box bottom showed the box was not buried at the victim's death site, but moved from elsewhere in the woods or near the farm. This led the investigation team to believe James did not die deep in the woods, as previously speculated, but was most likely murdered near his residence or a trail easily accessible by vehicle. When combining the box production data, a type of old metal toolbox commonly attached to farm trucks, with 1978 file information about the missing toolbox from the horse barn, the investigation team concluded the perpetrator used James's own box to dispose of the body. This completely changed the view of the entire case. If the perpetrator was a stranger, using the victim's exact toolbox was extremely unlikely. No one randomly enters the woods and selects the farm owner's distinctive item to hide a body. This required knowledge of James's property and the right timing to take it without drawing attention. The investigation team concluded James's time of death was very close to when he left home. Thanks to bone analysis, forensics determined soft tissue decomposed in near anaerobic conditions, meaning the body was placed in the box while intact, rather than after prolonged exposure. This completely ruled out the possibility he was injured in the woods and died hours or days later. When combining this data with 1978 weather, a recorded afternoon rain by multiple witnesses, investigators assessed death occurred in a very short period after he left home. Possibly before the rain started. They asked if James left in the morning, died that day, and the body was disposed of quickly. Why did no one in the area hear cries for help or signs of struggle? The answer lay in the geography. The Kellerman farm was relatively isolated, with distance between the house and nearest neighbor wide enough for sounds to be blocked by trees and hills. When reconstructing the death location based on drag marks on bones and box soil analysis, the investigation team found a match between soil inside the box and the moist soil beside the horse barn, which had more clay than the forest soil where the box was found. This meant the body was placed in the box near the horse barn or within the farm grounds before the box was moved into the woods. From this, the investigation team inferred James was attacked near home, possibly in the horse barn, backyard, or storage area, then strangled with rope similar to the type missing from the barn. Afterward, the perpetrator dragged or lifted the body into the metal box, closed the lid, secured it, and used a vehicle, most likely James's truck, to transport the box into the woods, dig a shallow hole, and bury it. This was a crucial conclusion because it linked three previously disconnected facts existing for 30 years but never pieced together: the missing truck, the vanished toolbox, and the cut rope. New evidence showed all belonged to the same chain of perpetrator actions. When reanalyzing 1978 statements, the investigation team noticed many inconsistencies with the new timeline. Martha's statement about James checking the north fence was deemed worthless because soil forensics showed the victim never went deep into that area. Statements about James's clothing also changed across interviews, but denim forensics proved he wore denim pants on the disappearance day, matching witness descriptions rather than Martha's later accounts. Statements about departure time, trip purpose, and details of James's behavior before vanishing were all inconsistent with new data. When combining all information layers, the investigation team completely eliminated hypotheses once considered plausible in the case's early years. James did not have an accident, was not attacked by animals, did not get lost, and did not encounter a stranger in the woods. The body in the box, cut rope, missing toolbox, and drag marks all indicated death occurred very shortly after he left home, at a location near or on the farm. Disposing of the body using personal toolbox and burying it deep in the woods was quickly prepared but intentional behavior, not a panicked reaction by a stranger. The 2008 timeline thus became the first version capable of accurately reflecting the actual events of summer 1978. The first to move the case out of speculation's fog and closer to determining criminal responsibility. Based on forensic and mechanical analyses obtained after the 2008 metal box excavation, the investigation team continued focusing on the central question: how James Riley Kellerman's body was taken into the woods and buried in a toolbox nearly impossible to move by one person alone. Determining the disposal method not only helped narrow suspects, but also reconstructed perpetrator behavior in the period right after James was murdered in 1978. The first analysis targeted the box movement mechanism. On the metal box bottom, forensics recorded a series of long, straight, parallel scratches directed from front to back, not chaotic scratches caused by hand dragging over rough terrain. This indicated the box was dragged over relatively stable ground, most likely flat land or a partially leveled trail. The scratches varied in depth, but mostly concentrated in two narrow bands corresponding to the box edges, consistent with dragging using large continuous force. This characteristic ruled out the perpetrator carrying or lifting the box by hand, as that would show dents from shoulder pressure or hook points instead of drags entirely on the bottom. Besides scratches, the box had two dark rust streaks on the lower edges, indicating strong friction with sandy, clayey soil. When comparing rust soil samples from these streaks with farm and nearby trail soil, the forensic lab determined most soil under the box matched the dry clay mix soil on the South Farm Trail, used in 1978 as truck access. This evidence proved the box was dragged through that area before burial, farther in the woods. From here, the investigation team cross-referenced old witness reports. In 1978, a resident mentioned seeing strange tire tracks near the forest edge, but police then did not consider it noteworthy. Re-examining old notes with modern analysis, the team realized the tire track area overlapped the trail the box likely passed. This created the first link between modern evidence and scattered 1978 information. More crucial evidence emerged when forensics examined the box bottom and found small rubber fragments, only a few millimeters, stuck in rust crevices. Analyzing polymer structure via infrared spectroscopy, they identified it as rubber from old truck bed liners, especially Chevrolet CK series models, produced late 1960s to mid-1970s. This was the exact line James owned at disappearance. The 1978 record noted James's truck vanished at the same time, but lacking vehicle tracking technology, police then could not trace it. Now, with rubber fragments in the box matching James's truck type, the investigation team concluded the box was placed on or against the truck bed before being dragged down the trail. Most likely, the perpetrator used James's own truck to transport the box from the farm. Compression marks on box edges also showed strong impact against a hard edge at truck bed height, matching the hypothesis the box was loaded hastily, without tools. The forensic lab continued analyzing box bottom soil structure, distinguishing two clear layers. The top was 2008 burial forest soil, with leaf litter. The bottom was high sand trail soil, consistent with truck routes. The layer order confirmed the box was dragged or placed on the trail before entering deep woods, then buried. This provided a logical mechanism. The body-filled box was placed in the truck bed. The truck drove into the woods via the South Trail, reached a remote area, then the box was dragged off, pushed away from the road, and buried. An additional factor reinforcing this was drag mark direction on the box from truck bed to ground and deeper into the woods, matching the 1978 trail's gentle slope. By combining analyses, the investigation team determined the disposal method in 4 steps. 1. The body was placed in the toolbox near the horse barn after James was killed. 2. The box was closed, secured, and somehow lifted onto the victim's truck bed. 3. The truck was driven into the woods via the South Trail. 4. The perpetrator dragged the box off the truck, used great force to pull it to the final burial spot, and covered it with soil. Using James's truck not only provided transport, but ensured the perpetrator would not arouse suspicion if someone saw the truck moving that morning. In fact, a 1978 witness mentioned hearing a familiar engine sound near the farm direction, but then it was deemed unimportant, since no driver was seen. Now, that information gained new meaning. Thanks to evidence analysis, the team concluded the perpetrator had access to James's truck, could drive it, knew the forest terrain, and knew how to use the victim's toolbox. All this fit intervention by someone familiar with James, his property, habits, and farm layout, rather than a random stranger. Thus, the disposal method was clearly and coherently reconstructed, completely eliminating old investigation directions and marking a pivotal turning point in moving the case from speculation to determining criminal behavior based on specific physical evidence. When the disposal mechanism was reconstructed clearly and consistently, suspicion turned back to the only person with full opportunity, time, and absolute knowledge of the farm and James's habits on the day he vanished: Martha Kellerman. Although in the 1978-1980 phase, police lacked grounds to view her as a suspect, 2008 forensic data completely changed the evaluation context. The body being strangled, placed in the victim's toolbox, then transported in James's own truck and buried far from the farm, suggested a perpetrator with environmental control and access to his property, factors Martha fully possessed. Police began by cross-referencing Martha's old statements with new forensic data. In her 1978 statement, Martha described James leaving to check the north fence, but 2008 soil forensics showed box-bottom soil matched the south farm area with the truck trail into the woods. This immediately raised the question, if James went north, why did disposal traces appear entirely south? When re-questioned in 2008, Martha changed her statement, saying maybe James changed his mind and went another way, but this change heightened police suspicion as it contradicted James's stable character and fixed routines per acquaintances. Another contradiction emerged, comparing Martha's statement about James's clothing with the rotted denim in the box. In 1978, Martha claimed he wore a light cotton shirt and regular pants, but forensics showed the denim matched the work pants James wore nearly daily, seen by neighbors, but denied by Martha. When asked about this difference in re-interrogation, Martha replied she didn't remember clearly because it was too chaotic, but police saw the statement change as adaptive coping, not natural memory lapse. A bigger issue was James's truck, which vanished when he did, and was never found. Toolbox forensics revealed rubber fragments tied to James's old truck model, proving the truck was used to drag the box into the woods. When confronted, Martha initially denied knowing where the truck went on disappearance day, but when police asked why she changed her 1978 statement about the truck's location, Martha faltered and gave a new answer. Maybe James drove it out before entering the woods, but this contradicted her own statement. He led the horse into the woods instead of driving. Forensics also ruled out James loading the box himself, as the body-filled box, then too heavy for one person, and bone drag marks showed post-death movement, not voluntary pre-death action. When asked about the cut rope in the horse barn, Martha said she never used rope and didn't know who could have cut it. But forensics showed the strangulation rope could originate from the same 1978 cut rope, and only someone present on the farm then could access both. Police shifted to evaluating opportunity. On disappearance day, Martha was the only one home, and her statements about James's departure time continually changed across 1978 to 2008 interrogations. This led the investigation team to conclude she had enough time to commit the act, especially since forensics showed James died very shortly after leaving home. Bone decomposition indicated no multi-day gap between disappearance and body placement in the box. This fit the hypothesis the body was handled the same day, possibly within hours of James stepping out. Police also assessed Martha's scene access. She knew the horse barn layout, toolbox, and rope locations, and was the only one accessing James's truck without suspicion. She knew forest entry routes from the farm, including the South Trail. Forensics showed the box drag-through, which Martha regularly used to haul livestock feed. Her ability to drive James's truck was not ruled out. Some relatives said they saw Martha drive it off the farm when James was busy. Motive, though unproven at this point, but Martha's contradictory statements and flustered reaction when mentioning the truck and toolbox led police to believe she might have personal reasons tied to money management, family disputes, or relationship issues. James mentioned to acquaintances. However, at this stage, the investigation team remained cautious. They noted motive was unclear, but opportunity, execution ability, and statement contradictions all made Martha a focus for scrutiny. When re-interrogation ended, the internal report concluded Martha Kellerman's statements no longer fit any sequence established by forensics. Current data indicate she may have been present throughout the entire chain of actions leading to James Riley Kellerman's death. This was the first time in 30 years Martha was officially marked as the primary suspect in the murder file rather than just an information provider. The reconstruction of the death mechanism, the disposal process, and the increasingly clear contradictions in Martha's statements led the investigation team to the decisive phase, completing the file to submit to the district prosecutor and requesting an arrest warrant after 30 years of silence. In the weeks following the final interrogation, a special investigation team was formed to compile all the new evidence, including the 2008 forensic report, the analysis of the strangulation mechanism, drag marks, toolbox examination, analysis of the rubber fragment linked to the missing truck, and forensic statement cross-references. Each individual element might not have been sufficient to conclude a crime, but when placed together, they formed a complete logical chain showing that James Riley Kellerman was murdered right on the farm and the perpetrator had access to the property, thorough knowledge of the victim's living space, time to act, and a reason to conceal the death immediately. The investigative agency spent considerable time reviewing Martha's statements across key milestones, 1978, 1979, and the 2008 interrogation. Each time, her account of when James left the house, the direction he went, the clothes he wore, his morning behavior, the truck's location, and activities in the horse barn changed in unusual ways, contradicting neighbors' accounts and inconsistent with forensic data. The report provided by the Alabama State Forensic Office also clearly stated the cause of death was strangulation with strong and continuous force, incompatible with an accident or a sudden attack by a stranger. The use of James's personal toolbox to contain the body, drag marks of the box along the southern trail, and the absence of the truck for the entire 30 years were factors indicating that the perpetrator had both time and means to dispose of the body discreetly. The district prosecutor, after reviewing the file, concluded that the threshold of circumstantial evidence had reached a level sufficient to request an arrest, especially since the forensic results provided direct physical links between the 1978 evidence and the 2008 evidence. From a legal perspective, this was decisive. The case was no longer based on speculation or changing accounts, but on scientific evidence, physical traces, and irrefutable mechanical analysis. A petition for an arrest warrant was prepared, over 60 pages long, detailing every interpretive step, contradictory statements, examination results, and reconstructed timeline. In late December 2008, the county judge approved the arrest warrant for Martha Kellerman on charges of first-degree murder under Alabama law, based on the elements: intent to cause death, use of a strangulation tool, concealment of the body, and transportation of the body to avoid detection. The next morning, Conecuh County police forces, in coordination with state investigators, carried out the arrest of Martha at the home where she had lived for more than 3 decades, since the day James disappeared. The arrest took place quietly, but tensely. Martha was asked to step out of the house, the warrant was read, and she was handcuffed according to procedure. According to the investigators present at the time, Martha did not resist, but appeared stunned and attempted to deny all charges. She said that they were misunderstanding everything, and she never harmed James, but when asked about the forensic evidence, she did not answer directly and only repeated that she did not clearly remember what happened 30 years ago. At the county headquarters, Martha continued to deny and requested a lawyer. But for the investigative agency, her inability to explain why the evidence from the horse barn matched the evidence in the box buried in the woods, or why James's truck disappeared at the same time he died, were signs confirming that the investigation was on the right track. Immediately after Martha's arrest, the sheriff's office issued an official statement to the media. The 1978 disappearance of James Riley Kellerman had been determined to be a homicide. The victim's body had been found after 30 years, and a suspect had been arrested. This announcement shocked the Conecuh County community, which had grown accustomed to the case's silence over many decades. Many had believed James had an accident or got lost in the woods. Others thought he left Alabama. But few imagined his body was in a metal box, buried just a few hundred meters from the house. The press release also affirmed that modern forensics played a decisive role in solving the case, emphasizing that old cases are never truly closed if there is evidence to analyze. On the afternoon of the announcement, many residents flocked to the site where the box was found, leaving flowers and some messages as a way to share the Kellerman family's loss. On the other hand, no few people were stunned to learn the suspect was Martha, the wife, who had appeared grief-stricken during the 1978 searches and lived quietly for the 3 decades afterward. For the investigation team, the arrest was not only the result of a 30-year process, but also proof that the picture of truth can always be turned over when science advances and when scattered points from the past finally fit together. With Martha arrested and charged with first-degree murder, the case officially shifted from cold case status to the prosecution preparation phase for the first time since 1978. James Riley Kellerman's death had a chance to be placed on the courtroom table with full evidence and legal arguments. The trial of Martha Kellerman officially began in early February 2009 at the Conecuh County Courthouse, marking the first time in over 30 years that James Riley Kellerman's disappearance was fully presented before the law, with all modern forensic evidence, cross-reference statements, and a detailed reconstructed timeline. The prosecutor opened by describing the overall picture of the case. James left home on a summer morning in 1978, vanished without a trace, leaving a case that dragged on for 3 decades without resolution until the toolbox containing the body was found in 2008. The 1978 witnesses were called one by one, including neighbor Clyde Harmon, who confirmed the time he last saw James and described his direction of movement. The prosecutor used this as a foundation to cross-reference with forensic soil data, proving that James did not go north as Martha's statement claimed, but when he died, the body was placed in the box in the southern area of the farm, where Martha could access most easily. The forensic report was presented over multiple sessions. The forensic expert explained how DNA was extracted from the decomposed bones, how mitochondrial DNA samples matched the sample from James's sister, and how STR analysis from the 1978 stored hair sample confirmed the victim's identity. Next, the materials expert presented the decayed denim fragment found in the box, explaining the similarities between this fabric sample and the 1978 stored sample, as well as concluding that both samples matched the denim pants James often wore while working. The rope analysis report was released next, showing that the rope segment in the box had the same structure, color, and braiding pattern as the cut rope in the horse barn in 1978. The expert emphasized that the cuts on both samples bore the characteristics of a work knife, the type in the farm's tool shed. This was key evidence against Martha's statement that she knew nothing about the cut rope and did not know who used it. The jury was asked to listen to the most complex presentation, the bone autopsy report. The expert described the hyoid bone damage, rib fractures, jaw cracks, drag marks, and decomposition level in a calm and precise voice. His conclusion was presented clearly. The cause of death was strangulation with rope, occurring very close to the time James left the house. This completely eliminated the accident hypotheses mentioned over the years. The prosecutor then presented the most crucial part of the entire trial, the disposal mechanism analysis. Scratches on the box bottom, 2-layer soil samples, heavy rust on the box edges, and the rubber fragment from the box bottom were placed next to images of James's truck from the archive. The mechanics expert clarified that the rubber fragment matched the bedliner type for the Chevrolet CK line that James owned in 1978. The prosecutor emphasized not everyone could access James's truck at the exact time he died. The only person with free access to the truck, toolbox, and horse barn area was the defendant. The reconstructed timeline presentation connected all the released evidence, the time James left the house, the death time frame, the body placement in the box, the route the box was dragged, and the burial site. This timeline refuted all of Martha's statements about James going far from the farm or into the woods alone. The courtroom was silent in many moments as the prosecutor pointed out each contradiction in Martha's statements, changes in clothing description, changes in the time James left, changes in the reason he went, changes in truck information, and changes in explanations about the cut rope. In the defense phase, the defense attorney tried to question the accuracy of DNA identification on the 30-year-old skeleton, but the forensic expert responded firmly that mitochondrial DNA and STR were both highly reliable, especially when cross-checked between two completely different sources. The defense also tried to argue that bone injuries could be from post-death impacts or burial conditions, but the expert pointed out that hyoid fractures and drag injury patterns only occur when soft tissue is still present. The attorney also mentioned the possibility of a stranger accessing the farm, but the prosecutor countered with the forensic chain, toolbox, rope, truck, Southern Trail, all within Martha's control. There was no evidence, even the smallest, suggesting a stranger's presence. After 2 weeks of trial, both sides completed their presentations. The jury retired to deliberate with hundreds of pages of forensic documents, old crime scene photos, cross-references, and statements spanning 30 years. After less than 4 hours of discussion, a number indicating the evidence persuasiveness, the jury returned to the courtroom. The foreman stood up, handed the verdict paper to the judge. As the judge read the verdict aloud, the courtroom held its breath. We, the jury, find the defendant Martha Kellerman guilty of first-degree murder. There was no hesitation in the next sentence. Verdict, guilty. Martha bowed her head, did not cry, did not react. The Kellerman family sitting behind held hands tightly, many bursting into tears. After 3 decades of weariness, James Riley Kellerman's death finally had an official conclusion in court. This was the end of the longest, most deadlocked phase of the case, but not yet the conclusion for the entire legal journey and the consequences this verdict would bring to the Conecuh County community. The sentence for Martha Kellerman was announced in late March 2009. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, fully reflecting the severity of the act of taking a life, concealing the body, and maintaining silence for 3 decades before James Riley Kellerman's death. In the final remarks, the judge emphasized that the sentence was not only to punish, but also to reaffirm the value of legal truth, especially in cold cases spanning many years, where evidence is eroded by time and human memory often distorts. This case became a prime example of the evolution in criminal investigation from the late 1970s to the early 21st century, from a simple search based on speculation and direct observation to a complex forensic analysis process relying on DNA material cross-references, mechanical analysis, and exploitation of long-stored evidence. In 1978, the investigation team had no tools for DNA analysis, no ability to identify metal rust related to vehicles, no procedures for collecting trace samples, and could not cross-reference rope or fabric at the detail level of 2008. Those limitations caused the case not only to deadlock, but also to be classified as missing person without criminal elements, leading to the decision to temporarily close the file in 1980. But this deadlock was not due to negligence, but to the era. If that evidence had been discarded instead of sealed and stored, if Deputy Clark's personal notebook had not recorded his suspicions, or if the toolbox had completely rotted before the hunter discovered it in 2008, the truth might have been buried forever. As science advanced, evidence that seemed meaningless in the past suddenly became decisive. That was also the most mentioned lesson after the sentence was announced: the importance of properly storing evidence, even in cases without clear signs of crime. Many missing person cases from the 1950s, 1980s in Alabama were never solved because evidence was gone, files lost, or preservation procedures substandard. The Kellerman case reminded that preserving a mud-stained denim scrap, a cut rope segment, or a seemingly meaningless crime scene photo could become the foundation for solving a case decades later. From a legal perspective, this was proof of applying modern forensics to cold cases, while affirming that time does not diminish the legal value of a crime. Many judges and prosecutors in the state cited this case as a typical example of the accuracy of mitochondrial DNA in severe decomposition conditions, or how combining soil rust, rubber analysis reconstructs the disposal route. The case also prompted Alabama investigative agencies to review risk assessment procedures in missing person cases, to be more cautious with small contradictions in statements, to fully record evidence even if not analyzable immediately, and to avoid classifying no criminal signs too early in the initial days. For the Conecuh County community, the Kellerman case closed a painful chapter, but left a profound mark on the persistence of investigators and the power of forensics in protecting justice. When the sentence was announced, many residents said they felt like the 30-year fog had finally lifted, returning the truth to its rightful place. And in Alabama's legal and criminal science works, this case will continue to be mentioned as a typical proof that time can blur everything but cannot erase traces of truth if evidence is preserved and science continues to advance. The James Riley Kellerman case, a man from Alabama who disappeared in 1978 and was only found after 30 years, reflects many issues that American society today still faces: the fragility of justice when evidence is lacking, the vulnerability of victims in isolated rural settings, and the importance of forensic science in bringing truth back to its place. One of the biggest lessons from this story lies in the details of seemingly small evidence: the torn denim fragment, the cut rope segment, the rubber piece in the toolbox, ultimately becoming the key to solving the case after 3 decades. This reminds us that in modern life, where information is quickly forgotten, systematically preserving data, documents, and evidence remains the core factor in pursuing truth, not only in law, but also in family management, finance, or important decisions. Another lesson comes from the prolonged silence surrounding James's death. For many years, the community believed he had an accident or left elsewhere, and that very assumption obscured the possibility he was a crime victim within his own family. This reflects the current challenge in America. Domestic violence and abuse are often hidden behind normal appearances. Martha's multiple changes in statements show the importance of honesty and the role of authorities in addressing even the smallest contradictions. Finally, the persistence of investigators, like Deputy Clark, keeping personal notes despite the file being closed, reminds that in real life, a small action, a note, an unanswered question can make a big difference later. In today's American society, where people must handle overwhelming information, patience and caution remain essential to protect truth, justice, and safety for oneself and the community. Thank you for following this journey to solve a case spanning more than 3 decades. If you found the story useful, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next cold cases. See you in the next video, where we will continue to explore mysteries thought to have been buried by time.